I'm the kid that's all a candy. I'm a Yankee Doodle dandy. I'm glad I am.
Hello and welcome to Artifactually Speaking. I'm Brad Hafford, archaeologist and specialist in the ancient world.
And I'm Tom Pedrick, historian of modern Europe.
And Tom, as we've always been saying on this series, objects tell us about history and they make it real. They make it come alive. And so that's why we want to look very closely at two objects in every episode. The way they were manufactured or decorated or cared for, this tells us about the activities of people and even the thoughts of the people at the time.
That's true, and we've discovered, and we've had fun discovering, that the best way to do this is to ask a series of questions. And they aren't so simple, but they are fascinating. And we've come to call them the questions of the artifactualist. We've created a pseudo-profession, if you will.
And today we're talking about two objects that are made of metal. And one of those metals is particularly mysterious. For a time in the mid-19th century, it was considered to be extremely valuable. And the Emperor of France at the time, Napoleon III, even is said to have had a dinner set of sorts, utensils made of this metal for his most esteemed guest. And the lessers, they just used mere gold.
Your Napoleon III reference, you've piqued my curiosity. And it's interesting, too, because by the turn of the 20th century, this particular metal was in such common use as that people were making mundane items from it. And the question is why? Why were they able to do it?
Exactly. And we'll get to that answer. But first, we're going to look at our first artifact.
Our what for this artifact? It's a business card on rolled metal. Now, this is for a Mr. H.W. Sparger, tailor. On the other side of the card, it has a frog and a teacup cartoon. Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. And I guess if your home's a teacup, that's pretty humble, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I've heard that there is an emoji of a frog and a teacup, and it's supposed to have the meaning of, yeah, but it's none of my business.
That's a popular meme you can see today. However, in this particular case, I think it just means home is important. It's your own unique place, no matter how wealthy you are.
Yeah, but you would, I don't know, for me, to put that on a business card doesn't seem to make much sense, but, that's kind of what we're looking into.
They might have been thinking it's a sentimental, charming image. It makes the card more collectible. Maybe you'll associate a positive feeling with that card, and then therefore with the tailor as well.
Right, but today I think we would put something related to being a tailor, but then they didn't care,
Right.
I guess.
Now, in this particular case, the wear is done for us. We can be really specific here since it's written right on the card. This tailor worked at 119 North Main Street, Canton, Illinois. The address today seems to be a spa or a gym or health club. Back around the turn of the 20th century, it was a tailor shop.
Right.
Now, I mentioned the turn of the 20th century. We're thinking that this card is from roughly 1900 to 1910, the very beginning of the 20th century. Through some research, we're able to find a couple details about our guy, Sparger. We think he was born in 1877 in Indiana. He's actually listed in a document called the Journeyman Tailors National Union of May 1900. He's listed as having paid 25 cents in the form of dues.
And this was the Professional Tailors Union, so he was a professional tailor by 1900.
We also do find him in the U.S. Census for 1900. He was 23 years old, he was a tailor, and he was married to Grace Sparger. They had no children. However, 10 years later, he was still a tailor, and he had 5 children. We also do find him registering for the draft in 1918. However, he was never called up for service.
And I guess older with children, you wouldn't be as prioritized to go off to France, basically.
Right. And then finally, we see him again in the 1920 census. He's 43 years old at that point, and he's the proprietor of a cleaning house in Jacksonville, Illinois. So perhaps the First World War disrupted his tailoring business?
Yeah, I'm going to show the card in a close-up here a little bit, and I noticed that in the top it says cleaning in the upper left, and over here pressing, so he was a tailor, but I think he did some of the jobs of, cleaning your clothes as well.
Right.
And so maybe becoming a cleaner later on.
Right.
Makes some sense, but I think that even after that, he's listed as a traveling salesman. So maybe he didn't get so much business from this novelty card as he had hoped.
Right, right.
I'm going to show the other side again and show us our little frog here, or toad. Some people say a toad in a teacup. These were pretty popular in the late Victorian Edwardian period, this sort of sentimental image. So I guess we can see the appeal.
And we do know just one final thing. He was still a salesman when he died in 1931.
Yeah, so we've been able to discover quite a bit about his life, and that's one of the things we don't often find in our objects, the actual person's name. Now, he had these made, and he did use them for other purposes, but in this case, it was kind of fun to be able to see and track this man's life.
Well, in our world, even though things are moving more and more digitally, we still have business cards. So you would hand them out at a place of business today or back then. Reminds customers of name, address, what services you'll provide, phone number, and today, of course, there would be email and social media.
Yeah, of course. These are big now. Back then, a phone was important, but, think about the time period. The phone had started to appear in more homes and businesses in particular, I guess, but it was still pretty rare. And the phone number on this particular card, I'm going to go back to the front of it here. Look at this, home phone 412.
Right.
It's only 3 digits. Today, of course we're going to have at least 7. We've got an area code, we're going to have 10. It just shows how few phones were out there, I think.
Yeah, there weren't that many phones in Canton at that time. A lot of people probably couldn't afford them.
Right, and when I first saw this thing, and I saw Canton, Illinois, the ILL is written in a cursive, and it seemed odd to me because we like the capital I and L, a 2-letter designation nowadays.
Right.
But I was wondering, what is this? And of course, the only Canton I'd heard of is in China. We sometimes say Canton, I guess.
Actually, the town was named after Canton, China,
Huh?
or Canton. They are antipodes of one another.
Is it really they're directly opposite on the globe, or is it just close and they thought, close enough? Who knows?
That I couldn't tell you, but at least the founder or one of the early founders perceived them as being close enough. So even then, business cards were common, but this one was unusual. Well, it sticks out because it was made of metal.
I think even today, if we got one that's metal, we would say that's a bit odd. Most of these things are paper, card.
Yes, and it's a little bit shiny. It'll have more weight in your wallet or pocket. It's got the charming little image on the other side, which makes it even more collectible.
Of course, business cards like this, even with its somewhat unusual image on the other side, serve to identify people, like you'd said, and their businesses. And our next object is somewhat similar, but it doesn't really identify a person. It identifies a product. And so, let's look at our second artifact. In this case, what we're looking at is the circular tobacco tag made of tin. It's a way of displaying the brand of the individual plug of tobacco.
Plug?
Yeah, well, that's what they called them. They were little squares of pressed tobacco. I'm showing the back of the actual tag here, and you can see these 2 little tines that are folded over. Well, those would have stuck straight out and been pushed into the top of the plug. So you would have this square of tobacco that had been pushed in, and that would then be pushed into it to identify that square of tobacco. So basically, in the 19th century, tobacco manufacturers used to push these big bricks of 1 pound of tobacco, and they would put it into a wooden crate, and they would send these out. But the customers, they wanted to buy smaller amounts. So the tobacconist would take that big brick, and then they would use this big chopping thing, and they would cut off plugs, smaller things that they would sell for a nickel. People could take that home with them or whatever, and they could pull some of it off of the brick and put it in their mouth to chew it, or put it into a pipe to smoke it. Well, around 1870, they started to realize, hey, if we had pre-cut plugs, wouldn't this be easier? You no longer have to do this big chopping. I guess you could cut down a smaller plug if you really needed to. And in this case, of course, we're looking at the brand that's called Battle Axe. You can see how small it is. It's bright red, though, and this is kind of attractive, I think. You would see this on that plug, and you would identify that, hey, I'm chewing this brand. But it also says up there AT Co apostrophe S because they created this. So that's the company that owned the Battle Axe brand. It stands for American Tobacco Company.
I'm guessing if it's the American Tobacco Company for our where, we're thinking about the United States.
We are, and in fact, ATCO or American Tobacco was really big, formed in 1890, and it was a conglomerate of a lot of other tobacco companies. So they took over, and they had about 80% of the tobacco firms in the U.S. So from 1890 to about 1911, they controlled a large portion of the U.S. tobacco industry. In fact, so large that in 1911, antitrust laws broke them up. So this tag probably dates from the middle of that time period, 1900, I'm saying around there, somewhere in that range, maybe 1905. And how it's made is out of rolled tin. So they would roll it into a thin sheet, and they would print on that. They would print using a lithograph process, and they used bright colors to be attractive. And then they would cut out these little circles or, whatever form that you're using. And I find that some of the battle axe ones are really interesting because they're cut into the shape of a battle axe. And that makes sense, right? You can identify it. But once again, I'm going to show a little bit more about this. So the back of it, and I wanted to show those tines again. So when this thing was cut out of its sheet of tin, those tines would have been flat out, and you would just have little spiked horns. Then you bend them in so that it will secure itself into the plug of tobacco. Well, this metal tin is pretty common and pretty cheap at the time. This is why they were making them out of that. The wooden plugs didn't last long. They didn't stick into the plugs. It's much rarer to find a wooden plug. But these tin ones, pretty darn common.
I'm just thinking that the metal of the business card is a different matter entirely.
It is, and we might get to our mystery now, right?
Yes. The metal use of the card was so valuable that, as we said, Napoleon III made a special expensive dinner set out of it. And here's our great reveal. That metal is aluminum.
Yeah, and today we think of aluminum for soda cans or, ubiquitous. It's out there constantly. But aluminum was fit for a king at one point.
And at another point, it was fit for a tailor.
Exactly.
How is it made, though? This card is made of rolled aluminum. So aluminum, or as the British say, aluminium, I think they say that because it sounds more scientific, it sounds more like an element.
Yeah, and I don't know if originally it had the I in it. It's still, they spell it with the I, so, aluminium.
Yes, and however you want to say it, it's one of the most abundant metals on the planet.
Yes, it
in
is.
1825, Danish physicist Hans Ørsted officially discovered it. And in 1886, there was a process of removing aluminum from bauxite ore using electricity.
It takes a lot of electricity, but they had developed this, and you can see how long it took. I mean, if they discovered that it existed in 25, but in 86, they finally figure out how to extract it. And then they realized just how common and easy it is. But when it was bound up in bauxite ore and you didn't know how to get it out, that's why it was so valuable, because it was rare.
With hydroelectric power increasing, the process could be made in a large scale so that by the 1890s, aluminum prices really plummeted.
Yeah, they did. It was really rare. Aluminum, as processed aluminum, was very rare in the 1850s. And that's when Napoleon III reigned from 1852 until 1870, I believe. And so
that's right.
In his early reign, aluminum really was very rare and even a greater novelty. We're talking about this card being novel because it's made of aluminum, but that was in 1900, 1905, somewhere around there. So you can imagine in 1852, when it was extremely rare and so lightweight, it would be even more new and unusual.
And his reign is frequently called, well, it was officially declared the Second French Empire. So what would celebrate more something imperial more than an expensive set of dinnerware?
Yeah.
In 1895, a single factory in Switzerland produced 450 metric tons. Yeah, so obviously by the 1890s, prices had fallen enough that a tailor in a small city could use aluminum for his business card.
Hmm. Yeah, they had started making thinner and thinner because once they discovered how to extract aluminum, they knew it was lightweight, they were going to use it. They could roll it out. By 1910, I think they introduced aluminum foil, and that's very thin, and you can wrap things. This card is not as thin as that, of course. And they printed on it the same way that they did the tin, but not as colorful, right? They used lithography on this card?
Yes, and to the best of my knowledge, the process of lithograph paper had been invented in the 18th century, but later it was applied to metals, such as aluminum.
Yeah, because at first they're printing on paper or card or something, and then they realized they can do it on, well, anything kind of thin like this, and they print it on metals.
But why?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, to advertise Sparger's business. I did read something interesting that business cards date back to 15th century China. They were called meshi or meishi. I'm not sure how to pronounce either Mandarin or Cantonese.
Well, they also appear, well, later than that in Japan, and they do call them meishi there. As far as I know, originate as bamboo pieces that announced a visit or something. What were the meishi?
Yeah, they were produced for local people ahead of a royal visit, but we don't have a ton of evidence for this.
Hmm.
We see them appear in Europe in 17th century England, including bearer cards, trade cards, and calling cards. And the last one is also called a visiting card or a carte de visite.
Right, and those were popular in the U.S. as well in the mid 19th century. Certainly, 1860s, we even find some that have printed photographs because photography is starting to be used in those times. So some of these carte de visite had an image of the person themselves who was visiting or announcing themselves.
And this became more common as they became cheaper.
Of
More
course.
people used them, more people even collected them.
Mhm.
So who used this card? Well, we already talked about Mr. Sparger, but who did he give the cards to? Well, any potential customer, although maybe these were special customers and he disseminated normal paper cards to
Right.
other customers.
Yeah, how many aluminum ones did he make? I mean, they must have been more expensive than the paper ones, so he might have only had a small set, but we don't really know, right?
Right,
We've got this
right.
one card.
So what kind of customer was he trying to attract? Well, the card says pay less and dress better.
Hmm.
So maybe he was targeting the middle class. However, the card could appeal to a collector of such items even back in its time.
Hmm.
Aluminum was still novel. Obviously, it had decreased in price, but people still thought of it as unique and neat. And going back to that image on the back, particularly sentimental images were things families wanted to put in scrapbooks. The frog is sentimental and likable. To go back to the other side, when you see Sparger's name, there are 4 circles in the corner.
There are, and I hope we can get that. Okay, see this circular right where it says cleaning? And there's another one down here, and with the right light you can really see them. They're all pretty much the same size, and I wondered if that was part of the manufacture. But it could be that someone was sticking it down, right? If you stuck it into a book with this side up, because you wanted to show that picture into a scrapbook, then you would need glue on the 4 corners behind it, right?
Right,
And,
right,
and I wonder, and that would defeat the purpose for Sparger because his name would be never associated
right.
with it because it would be inside a book, and no one would necessarily know it came from a tailor.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, I'm not sure.
We can't know exactly, but we look at these little clues and wonder if they did come from the manufacturing because we know they rolled the aluminum out. Why would you need those little circles as well? Unless it was holding it for cutting it, but I'm not sure. Well, collectors would also want tobacco tags, maybe because they're bright and colorful. But one of the main reasons people at the time collected them was because companies offered premiums for the return of these tags, basically. So you send in things and you get something back from the company. Similar in many ways to things that we do today or have in the past. Turn in box tops or something like that where you would get something back. And so who's using these? Well, tobacco chewers or pipe smokers, obviously. But one of the advertisements I saw from this time period I thought was kind of funny because it said, a man who has been chewing a lot of tobacco and has forgotten to get his wife a gift can turn in all of the tags that he's collected and get her a set of cutlery. I thought, oh my God. But we do know that they did offer, companies offered a lot of different things, and often they were silver-plated spoons or forks. But they also offered things like cufflinks and watches and things like this. But you had to have hundreds of these tags. And that would promote user loyalty in that brand. One last thing that I want to show with my close-up is I have this one we've seen. But I want to show another one because it shows some of what we were talking about with manufacture. It's in a particular shape, and that shape is identifiable to anyone who knows tobacco because that's what it is, a tobacco leaf. So it says Taylor Brothers Natural, and it's been decorated in the form of a leaf of tobacco. So another thing that I found really interesting about this was when they first made these tin tags, there was a guy who invented it essentially. I think his name was Ben Finzer, and he tried to patent or copyright the tin tag, but he lost the court case. So pretty much every company went to using these things. About 12,000 different kinds are now known. But the first one to make it was Lorillard, P. Lorillard Company. And they would stick that tag into, so here's the tag, and they would stick it into the plug and then wrap that plug with the final leaf of tobacco. Well, that means that this thing was hidden, right? And if you then, some people, I guess, would just bite into it and get a chew, and they might end up with this thing in their mouth. And it led to chipped teeth and things like that. So.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when people bite into an olive only to discover it still contains the pit.
You're right. And you didn't expect it, so you bit down hard and you hit something.
Yeah.
So that led to a whole lot of problems, and then they decided we're not going to wrap it outside, we're just going to leave it in the top so you can see it. And,
it's wise.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've talked some about the why. It's obviously to mark individual things. One of the problems that they had was when they did these giant blocks of the 1 pound stuff, and the tobacconists used to cut them off. You could repackage lesser quality tobacco in the crates and things like this, so people were cheating, and they thought, well, if we can do individual marking, then everyone will know this is ours. And if we can keep them looking for those marks and we can give them back these premiums, these kickbacks, if you want to call them, then people will stick with this thing and they'll want that brand.
I guess that's a bit like when people use Starbucks, accumulated points from Starbucks in order to get a free coffee.
Or, credit card points or something like this. These are premiums. And we did an Art of Actually Speaking about some radio and TV premiums, the early ones where send in this and get this back. And these things succeed for quite a while. So we know individual plugs come in the 1870s. But remember we said 1910, foil starts to show up. And a little bit later than that, by the 1920s, 30s, we're getting cellophane. They start to individually wrap these plugs, and they can print on those things. They can put their label there. They no longer need these tin tags. So they start to fade out in the 20s and 30s, and then you don't see them anymore. And furthermore, after the turn of the century, cigarettes started to get much more popular. And of course, we know about individual packs of cigarettes being wrapped in cellophane and foil and all of that. And we've even talked about cigarette cards that were put in. So these are now printed, lithographed card that goes in to do the same thing, identify the company and get people to collect it and keep coming back to that one company. So the idea continues, but the tin tags do not.
Well, I'm just thinking about why I enjoy doing this podcast so much. And we've examined a few bits of metal, and we were able to uncover a whole history behind them.
Exactly what we're trying to do with any object. And again, there are still questions, and we're not always right about everything, but we learn a lot, and we hope that our listeners do too. So I think that's about all the time we have for now.
Yep.
I'm Brad Hafford.
And I'm Tom Pedrick.
Join us again next time on Art of Actually Speaking.
Until soon.
Yankee Doodle came to London just to ride the pony.